Welcome to Publishing 101, Don't Sign That Contract. So this is a tutorial to provide first-time authors, but really authors of any stage, a checklist to go through and work through before you commit to a contract with your publisher. This is primarily related to academic publishing, but it actually does relate to trade publishing as well. So trade presses, university presses, and others will be relevant here. So I'm going to be diving into a document that I'll be constantly referring to. And this document is something that you can get a hold of if you want to follow along. All you need to do is head to this URL you see, bookcontractchecklist.firstgenprof.com, and then you can get hold of the checklist there. But then let me go ahead and show you what the checklist is, and we can dive in. Before we see it, here's a basic overview of what we'll be dealing with today. Things like advances, that is the amount of money that a publisher provides to an author upon signature typically, or upon other benchmarks in the contract that are given in lump sum, but then is an advance on one's royalties, and we'll get into that. Things like the number of copies you can expect to receive as an author, whether or not you can purchase copies of your own book to give to friends and colleagues, and what discount. And then we'll get into the nitty-gritties of things like royalty basis and tiers and other issues there. Okay, so here is the actual checklist. Let me go ahead, and I'm not sure why it's highlighted like that, but that's all right. It gives us a sense of what those are. Okay, so we're going to move through these pretty much one by one, and some of these things I'm going to gloss over earlier, or I guess more briskly than others. But then some require us to delve in, a little bit more in detail. Okay, so a few things that are important but pretty simple. The advance, this first issue of advance. So as I mentioned before, there are some contracts in which the publisher is eager to get you to sign with them. They want to show a good faith interest in your work, and especially if they're competing with another press for your work. If you have simultaneously sent a contract, or if you have an agent, for example, working on your behalf, that they may want to seal the deal with you by giving you a healthy advance. An advance is not just free money, and it's not a signing bonus per se. What it is an advance payment of your royalties before you have sold a single copy. So let's say that you're working through. I've created a sort of blank worksheet that you can use on your own, and then here we have a kind of pre-filled one. And in this scenario, I'm imagining that you have you have two different offers, but maybe you don't. So if you only have one, don't worry about publisher 2 or publisher 1. But we're going to try to enter in the information that we're receiving from each of these. So hypothetically, let's say that we had two offers from two different presses. One was with an advance of $5,000, one with an advance of $3,000. The way you want to interpret that is not that that's a signing bonus, that's just, money on top of everything else. What this means is that publisher number 2 has agreed to give you $5,000 of your royalties in advance of you selling a single book. Now, very importantly, you will not see another dollar of royalties until your book sales have reached a level where you are, in effect, making the 5,000th and first dollar of royalties based on your royalty percentage and your tiers, and we'll get into that in a second. So when you have an advance, what that means is typically in the beginning of the sales of your book, unless it just goes mega New York Times bestseller immediately, is you actually won't see royalty checks for a little bit of time until book sales reach a place where you have exceeded the amount that you were given in advance in royalty. So royalty matters. It matters a good deal, but it's not just extra money. It's a commitment. Now, one thing that royalties do indicate, at least in my view, when it comes to a publisher, is how much confidence they have in the book, and also how much on a limb or on the line are they in signing your book. If you have a publisher that throws a lot of money at you, let's say that you get an offer of, I don't know, $40,000 versus a $3,000 advance, it stands to reason that this publisher is going to put more marketing effort into your book, perhaps, than publisher number one, because they want to get that money back. If the book fails, if no one buys this book, you don't give that advance back. That's your money. You just won't make any more in advances. So the press itself has a vested interest in doing good marketing, getting your name out there, and trying to get these books, get these books off the shelf when the advance is larger. So a bigger advance is better than a smaller advance, but not necessarily for the reasons you might expect. It's not free money. Okay, let's go back to the main checklist here. The number of author copies. This is not a super big deal, but let's say you don't have a large advance. Maybe let's say that in some cases you get no advance. There are some first-time authors. For my first book with the University of California Press, I did not receive an advance. I have received advances since then. But in such a situation, which is not uncommon in academic publishing, although I think it should be less common, then it matters how many copies of your own book you are going to receive from the press for free, so that you can give them out to friends and family, to the people who helped you along the way, to colleagues you want to network with, to your own department, and so forth. And so maybe in some cases you have a publisher who says you'll get 25 complimentary copies, and another one says you'll get 48 complimentary copies. And, it is a good faith effort when a publisher wants to honor your work by saying, we'll give you, more copies to distribute to your network. But of course, this is not a make or break issue. No one should sign one contract over another because of the number of author copies, but it is a factor. A related thing is something called author discount. So an author discount means after, if you wanted to get, let's say, the 26th copy of your own book, or the 49th copy in this case of your own book, that is after you've received your free ones, you want to buy a copy of your own book from your publisher, what is the discounted rate at which they will sell it to you? And so, maybe there are lots of friends that you want to thank. Maybe there are, you do want to distribute more widely in your network. Well, in this case, in this hypothetical scenario, publisher number one is saying, we'll sell you your own book at 50% of the retail price. And another one saying, we'll sell you back your own book at 40% of the retail price. So they make it slightly easier, more cost-effective for you to give out complimentary copies if you want. All right. This next issue, let's go back over, I guess, to the kind of outline of this tutorial, has to do with publication type. And what I mean is, in what formats will your book be published? The three main ones being, of course, hardback, paperback, electronic. Not every publisher is going to publish a hardback, sometimes referred to as a cloth title. Not every publisher is going to offer a contract where they guarantee or commit to offering a paperback version of your book, unless you have reached a certain benchmark of sales, for example. Most places commit these days to producing a Kindle version or some sort of e-version of your book. But in any event, you want to know in very clear terms what forms your book will take. And very importantly, one that first-time authors often forget to ask about has to do with sequence. So if we come back over here to the checklist, I want to know, is the hardback, let's say they say, yes, we're going to publish in both hardback and paperback. It's reasonable to ask, will you be publishing hardcover and paperback simultaneously, or will you be releasing them sequentially? And typically what publishers will do in that situation will be to publish the hard copy first. Then, it sells for a higher price. They can make better profit, and, they can capture that initial interest in your book. It's the only format in which it's available, so everyone is buying it in cloth or hardcover. And then after 6 months, after a year, then they will release the paperback version. That's one thing you often see in publishing, but it's not the only one. Sometimes you can get simultaneous hardcover paperback publication, which can be advantageous for a number of things. One is you want your book to be available at an affordable price. You want it to be, if you're a professor, a teacher, a researcher, you might want it to be affordable enough to be assigned in classes. So there are a lot of reasons why you may want a simultaneous publication of hardcover and paperback versus a sequential one. Same thing as making sure you understand, will there be an electronic version? Okay. Now, there's another set of issues here which you're going to want to ask. Now, none of these, you'll notice, I'm not talking here about negotiation. At this stage, and what this video is really about, is making sure that you have the foresight to ask what about these things, and that if you are offered a contract, a draft contract or a formal contract, that you use this checklist to find and extract the relevant information from the contract and plug it into this checklist so that you have an easy to read version of it, and so that you know if there are any aspects or anything on this checklist I'm giving you that is not specified in the contract. And then you can follow up with your editor, the publisher, and say, you don't have to make any ultimatums or anything of that nature, but you can simply ask, I wasn't able to find information on the sequence of publications of hardcover and paperback, or I wasn't able to find any language about whether or not the press commits to producing a paperback. And then you can get information on that via email or through a subsequent revision of the contract and so forth. This is not about what to demand. It's about knowing what the variables are. So a whole huge category, and where the money is really, the money is not in the advance so much as the royalty basis and tiers. I should probably have, obviously royalty percentage basis and tiers. Royalty percentage is a pretty simple concept, that some percentage of an amount is how much royalty you will receive. But something that first-time authors often don't know about is that percent of what? Are we talking about the percentage of the price at which my book is sold, that is the retail price, or are we talking about the percent of the publisher's profits after they deduct their costs, which is a totally different number? If a book sells at, on Amazon.com or in a bookstore for $50, $30, that's the price that the consumer, the reader sees. That is not the price after a publisher deducts its expenses. So you want to know very clearly, what is the basis of your royalty? Is it list or is it net? These are two important terms. There are synonyms for that. But what we really mean is the retail price or the amount of money that's left over after the publisher has deducted their expenses for producing your book. And then a third thing that first-time authors especially do not ask about enough or delve into deeply is tiers. And what tiers mean are the number of copies sold. It's actually probably easier just to come back over here and to say, I don't know, let me use this example of what they say, hardback tier 1, hardback tier 2, hardback tier 3. And actually, let me just scroll ahead to the paperback and then we'll come back to that. Sorry. Paperback tier 1, paperback tier 2, paperback tier 3. Now, what this means is that for publisher 1 in their contract offer, they are saying that from the first book you sell up to sale number 3,000 of a paperback, your royalty in that tier will be 8%. But when you sell the 3,000th and first book up to the 6,000th book, then the royalty assessed on that range will be 10%. And then for 6,000 copies to forever, 1,000,000 copies, every one of those, the royalty percentage will be 13%. And the reason that these go up, quite obviously, is that the publisher wants you to be rewarded the better your book does. So if your book is selling like hotcakes, they want you to have a royalty rate that will increase. But if it's a dud, if it doesn't sell, if it only sells 2 copies, they are going to give you this sort of first tier. So these are royalty tiers. For every tier, you have a range of sales, how many copies of your book, and you also have a percentage. And that's what you want to make sure that you know. Now, not all contracts, not all things will have tiers. So here we have an example in hardback cover tiers. I have this in the checklist, but technically speaking, over here in the publisher publisher number 2 in this hypothetical example, this publisher has offered a contract in which there are no tiers. What that means is there is only one royalty rate that applies to hardbacks, or cloth as it's often referred to. So there's no range. But in publisher 1 in this scenario, they have offered tiers. So tier 1 at 8%, tier 2, 10%, tier 3, 13%. Now, which one's better? Which one's worse? Obviously, the ability to have a royalty rate that climbs matters a lot. You want the ability to climb, but where you really, really want your royalty tiers to climb, your royalty rate to climb along tiers, is in whichever format the publisher plans to market the most. So and that would in most cases be a paperback. The paperback is the one where you definitely want tiers, unless you just get some amazing royalty rate for all copies sold. And I guess that's possible. But you want tiers on your paperback royalties because that's where the publisher is going to be investing a lot of their energy in making sales. And by contrast, in contracts where there are both hardcovers and paperbacks, oftentimes, and this is especially true for academic publishers, there are only going to be a limited number of hard copy versions sold, like maybe a max of 1,000 or a max of 500 or a max of 2,000, and that the publisher, after those 2,000 copies are sold, or 100 or 1,000 or 500, is never going to make a hardcover again. They're only going to make paperback. So in such a situation, it would be pointless to have tiers because, of course, there's never going to be another book after that last hardcover is sold. So coming back to the list here, you want to find out for once you know if there's going to be a hardcover or is there also going to be a paperback, you want to know what is the royalty basis for your hardcover and your paperback. Is it going to be on the retail price or on the post deduction of expenses cost? Are there going to be tiers, and what are those tiers? And then what are the royalty rates inside each of those tiers? And then very importantly, what are the ranges within those? So how many copies do I have to sell to get from tier 1 to tier 2? Now that matters a lot, and it is an area which, when you get to the stage of negotiation, can matter a great deal, because it makes a big difference. Like if I have in this hypothetical scenario, let's go back down to paperback, royalty tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. If I have to sell 3,000 copies, 3,001 copies to get to the 10% marker, that's not as good as if I only have to sell 2,501 copies to get to the 10% marker, to get to the 10% range, because I get an additional 500 books, 500 sales at this better royalty rate. So in general, you want a good, healthy rise in royalty percentages. You want them to increment up in sizable amounts, but just as importantly, you don't want the ranges to be immense, because that would basically nullify the royalty rates. Like if you have to sell 50,000 books to get to tier 2, it doesn't really matter what tier 2 royalty rate is, because you ain't going to see it, chances are. So something that first-time authors and authors in general don't think about a lot. Now, ebook royalty rates is very complicated, and typically speaking, ebook royalty basis is only is never on retail price. And the reason is that ebooks are bundled in all of these crazy ways. And so there's no way that a press can say what the retail price of your ebook is. Sometimes it's included in subscription. Sometimes it's, so typically speaking, the ebook royalty basis is like whatever the publisher tells you the basis is. There's very little negotiation there. Ebook royalty is a place where, again, this is not a video about negotiation, but you should know, you definitely want to find out what this royalty is for ebook, because typically speaking, publishers are much more willing to give you a high royalty rate on ebooks because their costs in that realm are so much lower than in print. Now, I have one other item here, which is something that goes by different names. Sometimes it's referred to as e-bundle. And this is, you want to ask your publisher, if there's no language in the contract offer, you want to ask them what the situation is. Will my book have an ebook version? Okay, let's say yes. If there's an ebook version, is it going to be included in various subscription models? For example, different presses sell their ebook access to their ebooks to universities, such that any university who has a subscription to a certain blah, blah, blah press, everyone can read your book for free. And you need to be, we want people to be able to gain access to books. We want books to be affordable and accessible, but you want to be very, very careful that that aspect, depending on how you feel, and this is a political question as well, but you don't want to go through all of this hassle of figuring out what I think authors should get paid for their work. Let me just say it right there. I think authors should get paid for their work. And so I, for one, am very hesitant if there's going to be some sort of e-bundle offer that will basically nullify all of this, and that I'm going to see like 99 cents a year for something that I spent 15 years working on, and that, I believe is reasonable for someone to get hold of at an affordable price. So you do want to know, is my book going to be included in various subscription things, and how is that going to impact these other areas? And you can go so far as to say, I prefer that my title not be included in a particular set of bundles, or that I insist that it be included. There are more and more authors right now who, especially if they're working on more obscure academic topics where they know they're not going to see $1 of royalty, they would say, okay, well, I'm not making any money off of this, and so I want I'm sort of politically sensitive and savvy in this particular way, so I insist that the book be offered for free download or open access. If you are working on something that is, I don't know, the biography of, if you're writing a trade press book on the biography of Albert Einstein, and it's a definitive work that you spent 20 years working on, I believe you should get paid for your stuff, and that people should not be able to download that work for free. I think it should be affordable. That's where I stand on the spectrum of things. I believe in accessibility, but I also believe in the value of labor. And so you want to ask. You don't want to wake up one day after negotiating and finding out all about these royalties and ranges and tiers, that basically all of that doesn't matter because everybody effectively gets your book for free, and therefore nothing is happening. No books are actually being exchanged through sales. So a lot of things to wonder about. Depends on your sensibilities. Depends on what you believe. If you believe that you're how you understand your labor, et cetera, et cetera. But you do want to ask. Okay, let's go back over to the checklist. We have these things: serial rights, translation, resale rights. I'm not going to delve too much into this, but what that means is, and you can look this up, Google this, like first serial rights, second serial rights. But these are rights that pertain to titles that have more popular appeal, where, for example, in the lead up to the publication of your book, or maybe in the opening weeks of it, maybe there is a magazine or a newspaper that has exclusive rights to publish an excerpt of this. So you see this a lot with, I don't know, biography of famous politicians or presidents or whatever, sort of blockbuster things, and that there's an exclusive right arrangement between the publisher and, I don't know, the New York Times or whatever magazine we might want to talk about, Well, that's first serial rights, and this thing called second serial rights. And then there's a question of the split. What is going to be the split? If New York Times pays X amount of dollars to your press to get these first serial rights, how much do you see of that versus how much does the publisher see of that? So here is a pretty standard first serial rights breakdown that 90% of that money should go to you as the author. Only 10% should go to your publisher, but then it goes down after second serial rights. I'm not going to go into that, but you can ask about that. The same deal has to do with translation rights. A publisher, and I'm going to say a word about why there's two Chinese, non-Chinese here. That has to do with my own area of research. But publishers around the world might want to get the exclusive rights to publish a translation of your work in a particular language market, so French or Italian or Chinese, Japanese, Russian, whatever it might be. And there are, publishers have departments whose job it is to go to the Frankfurt Book Fair or trade, various things and try to sell the rights to your books. Typically speaking, or one way, let's say, that a foreign publisher can buy those rights is by making a advance offer and then perhaps their own sort of royalty tier rate system based on it. So, I have signed a few of my books for translation, and maybe one of them comes with an advance payment of $4,000 US or $5,000 US. How much of that money comes straight to me through my royalty payment from my publisher versus how much is kept in the bank account of my publisher? They take it. And here are some different revenue possibilities. Oftentimes it's 50-50, especially in academic publishing, but also I've seen this in trade. In my case, because I work heavily in Chinese history, and also I go to China a lot, give a lot of lectures in China, there was a question about whether or not for the Chinese revenue, the Chinese translation, that in this particular case, this actually comes from a real example of asking for a slightly better percentage where I make 60% and the press makes 40%. The logic being that for that language market, I am going to be putting in more legwork than for the German market. I don't speak German, so that's on you to, but for Chinese, I'm going to be doing some of the legwork to getting the word out about this book. So therefore, I deserve more money for my labor. And in that case, one of the publishers said yes. Now, resale rights, I'm not going to spend much time of it. This is the question of whether or not an author has the right to sell copies of their own book, be it on their website or at book fairs or things of this nature, or not. Now, you'll notice here that, and these come from a real example. Some of these are real examples and some of these are made up, but no is a very common answer. No, we are happy to help you have someone sit at a booth at your book talk, but they are going to be either contracted by or an employee of our press. And the money that comes through those credit card transactions is going to come into our bank account, and we will distribute royalties to you based on the contract. We do not want you buying a bunch of copies at a discounted rate and then selling them on your own, because then in essence you become a competitor to the press. Now, I say no here, but that is not to say that if you had something a publisher really wanted, that maybe they might be able to budge on that. The question is, the real matter here is that you want to know to even ask the question about resale rights, because if you do not ask about that, the default answer will be no. All right, we're getting to the end of the contract list. And by the way, if you do want to just follow along and get your own copy of this, you can go to bookcontractchecklist.firstgenprof.com, and it tells you about it. And you can just tell me where to send it, and then you'll get it. And then we're kind of almost at the end here. And these last two portions are important, but they don't have to do so much with kind of royalties and things of that nature. One has to do with how the book itself. Things like, when is it going to be due? What is the maximum word count? What is the maximum number of figures, that is images or maps or drawings or whatever, that I can include in the book? Who is responsible? Is there going to be an index for the book? And whose job is it going to be? At whose expense is it to create that index? Is the press going to do it for you? Are they going to do it for you, but they're going to charge money against your royalties to do it? Are they going to do it in-house, but do it for free? Are they going to say the author has to do it? either themselves or the author out of pocket has to hire an indexer. That's something that you're going to need to know. And things having to do with word count and word count max. Many first-time authors don't realize that that stuff is actually spelled out in the contract. And it's just good to know. You want to, these things are fungible. Editors sometimes are, if you go a little bit over the word count, or if you have maybe one or two more images, if you tell them, I'm going to be a week late or a month late, it's not as if they're looking to bring you into contract violation. But just know that this stuff is going to be or should be spelled out in the contract. And then approval. This is a big umbrella term by which I simply mean specifically things related to the book cover and the dust jacket. What will be your role in deciding the cover art of the book? Are you going to have just a consultative role, but ultimately it's the press's prerogative, which is often the default case? Or do you have approval rights that you have to sign off on something before it is done? That is very rare in my experience for a publisher to allow an author like actual approval rights. But where you may want to ask about this, so here you see that approval, in this case, actually not just book cover. You also have here, I actually have a separate issue here, title, cover design, consultation. Do I have the final approval of the title of my book, or is it just consultative with the title of the book? But then catalog and cover copy, like if when you publish this in your university press catalog, what role do I have in what happens if I hate the way you've described my book? What if I hate the way you describe it on Amazon.com, or I hate how you do it in your press website? Do I have final approval to say I don't approve of this, or do I simply have a consultative role? And then, of course, the cover. Now, there is one very important thing. If you learn nothing else from this video, and I hope you're learning something, is that treat the front cover and the back cover separately. Publishers jealously guard typically the front cover, but they inadvertently, in doing that, they shoot themselves in their own foot, because I can't count the number of books in which the back cover of the book has typos. And the reason is the back cover of a book, typically speaking, is not just artwork. It's things like the author's name and the bio and blurbs and a description and things of that nature. And what that means almost inevitably is that there are multiple people at the press working on the back cover. There's like copy editors and copywriters and artists, and somewhere in the mix, I have seen the author's name written incorrectly. The author themselves, their name written incorrectly, or the name of blurbers written incorrectly, and a variety of different mistakes. And that if you are willing to say, okay, the cover I want consultation on, I want to be happy with it, but ultimately it's your decision, it is reasonable to insist that I want final approval of the copy on the back cover, because you do not want that horrifying, just mortifying situation where the finished book goes to the bookstore and comes to you in the mail and you find typos on the back cover. It happens all the time. So approval has to do with that. And then the last one is a little bit of a dismal subject matter, but it really matters, is long-term planning. What happens if you die? What happens if you have a book that is an evergreen book, that it's going to go through multiple editions, and you die? Will the press have the right to take your royalties, or will they continue the royalties at the current contracted value in perpetuity for all editions of the book to your next of kin, or to, however you do it in your living will, or contractually, or however you do it? What happens if you are in a co-authored book and one of the authors dies, and the publisher wants to bring on a new third author to work on a new edition? How will royalties be redivided if there are different authors being brought onto the book? Can the publisher bring on a new author into a multi-edition book that the current authors don't want on the book? Do the current authors have the right to refuse bringing on a particular author? There are a variety of issues of survivorship issues that are really important to work out, especially if you have a book that is more along the lines of a textbook or a reference work, maybe not a research monograph. Of course, that's not going to, chances are, go through multiple editions, and they're not going to bring on new authors, possibly. But that's one issue. And the other issue has to do in long-term planning with editions. If you have a book that is fortunate enough to be one of those books that is kind of evergreen and there's going to be second and third and fourth and fifth editions, what happens to those royalty tiers that I talked about before? Simply put, if the book is doing amazing and you guys want a second edition, do I restart at royalty tier 1 all over again? Or do I get to stay at the highest royalty rate that I reached in the previous edition? I think you can do the math in your head that makes a huge difference. Because if we go back to the checklist and we imagine, I don't know, the paperback royalty rates, here we are, paperback royalty basis, and let's go down to rates, the tier and the range. Let's say my book is selling like hotcakes, and the publisher loves it and readers love it, and they want it to be updated, and then it's going into its second edition. Okay. Now, do I have to sell, if I get kicked back to the first tier for that second edition, that means I'm going to have to sell 6,000 books more of the second edition to get back up to the royalty rate tier that I was when the first edition sold out or whatever. Versus if you can negotiate with your press that, no, if I reach the 13% tier marker, then I want to stay in that tier 3 marker in perpetuity for the rest of the edition life cycle of this book. And so if we go to second edition, I'm going to stay in 13%, third edition, fourth edition, and so forth. And as you can see, over the lifespan of the book, you're going to be making a lot more on your book. And in my view, you deserve it because it's obviously proven itself above and beyond. The press is making money off of this. Everybody's happy. And there is no reason on planet Earth that you should be demoted or kicked back to tier 1, at least in my view. Now, you might have a publisher who is going to dig in and not move on that, but you want to at least ask. You want to plan for the worst, death, and you want to plan for the best, which is the book is amazing, everyone loves it, and it's going to go through 10 editions. Okay? So these are just the things that, in my experience, first-time authors and authors in general just don't even know to ask about, let alone negotiate. You can't negotiate about something you don't know exists. And so this checklist, which again, you can get a copy of, and again, there's a blank one that you can fill out on your own. Just go over here to bookcontractchecklist.firstgenprof.com, and you can get a copy of it there. And then, sorry, I'm not sure why that particular part is highlighted. You can get your own copy of it there, and you can build one for yourself. And then after this live stream is published to YouTube, I will also put this link in the description so that you can find it later. Well, that's the video. I hope that you got something out of it and that it was useful. I wish you all the best with your writing process. And please do add any questions you have from this, either now and I'll follow up, or after you get your hands on the checklist and start working with it. Thanks so much, and I'll see you soon.